Welcome back. It's being seen as a big win for the country against fugitive businessmen. 40% of the money defrauded by businessmen running away from the law like Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi and Mehul Choksi has been returned to banks and the government by the Enforcement Directorate. The agency has transferred attached assets to public sector banks that suffered a loss due to fraud committed by Vijay Mallya, Mehul Choksi and Nirav Modi. Munish Pandey gets us details.
They lived lives of total luxury, lived off money filched from banks, fattened their pockets and ran away from India. One is in jail in London, one still lives life king size, and one tries to hide from India on a Caribbean island. The holy Indian trinity of fraud has been hit where it really hurts, and their ill-gotten gain has caught up with them big time. From luxury properties to luxury vehicles to bank accounts and more. India's Enforcement Directorate has announced that not only have these assets been seized, but a significant share, amounting to over 9,300 crore rupees, has been transferred back to public sector banks and the central government. In simple terms, at least 40% of defrauded public money is back with the banks and the government now. The total amount defrauded by Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi and Mehul Choksi is 22,585.83 crore rupees, out of which properties worth 18,170 crore rupees have been attached by the Enforcement Directorate. The State Bank of India, one of the central banks defrauded, has received over 6,600 crore rupees. The Debts Recovery Tribunal has sold shares worth over 5,800 crore rupees of United Breweries Limited that were earlier attached under the anti-money laundering law. A further 800 crore rupees is expected to be recovered by June 25th. The Enforcement Directorate has made a scathing pronouncement on its actions, indicating that it's unearthed the myriad web of domestic and international transactions and stashing of assets abroad, irrevocably proving that Mallya, Nirav and Choksi used dummy entities controlled by them for rotation and siphoning off the funds provided by the banks.
The actions unveiled today by the Enforcement Directorate mean a sizable 40% of the total loss to the bank have been handed over to the banks. A huge step forward in reversing the monumental fraud committed by India's most wanted runaway tycoons.
The fraudulent trio continue to cover abroad, refusing to face Indian law. The king of good times fights tooth and nail from a luxurious mansion in England. Nirav Modi is behind bars, but fighting his extradition. And Mehul Choksi twists and turns on an Atlantic island. As the hunt for the defrauders continues, they'll be sleeping a lot less, knowing that the one thing that matters, perhaps the most to them, their money, is evaporating. Bureau Report, India Today.
And joining me on India First is Karnal Singh, former director of the Enforcement Directorate. Sir, what do you make of this development? Is this the first time ever that banks or victims will be compensated by seizing assets of the accused on the run from the law?
Yes, I agree. It is the first time it has happened in the history that in the money laundering cases, victims have been compensated. Now, it has resulted because of three reasons. The one is the government of India brought Fugitive Economic Offenders Act 2018. It was brought so that the people who are running away from the country, their all properties can be seized. They should be deprived from taking part in any civil litigations in the country, since they are not joining the criminal litigations which is taking place in the country. The second reason is, again, the government of India amended the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. Section 8 was amended so that the victims can be compensated. In this case, victims were the banks. So they are being compensated by this. And thirdly, it is an excellent work done by the officers of Enforcement Directorate. A large amount of this money, which has been compensated to the banks, it was not in the name of the accused. So the Enforcement Directorate officers were able to find out how the proceeds of crime has gone into these shares. It was an excellent work.
But sir, will the entire money ever be recovered? This is about 40%. There is another 40%. But will the entire money be recovered with interest? And if that is done, does that weaken India's case against people like Nirav Modi, Vijay Mallya or Mehul Choksi to get them back to India to face justice? Can they say in a court, for example, in London or Dominica, that since money has been returned, they can stay back in those countries?
See, number one is more than 18,000 crore worth of property has been attached, and that all will come back to the government and to the victims. Number two, the Enforcement Directorate has already moved various countries through letter rogatory to find out their more money. And we are hopeful that the remaining amount of money, that is around 3,000 crore or around, will also be attached by the Enforcement Directorate. Secondly, about the cases which they are facing abroad for extradition, let me tell you the basics of prevention of money laundering, which started in 1988 Vienna Convention of the United Nations. There were three issues in that. Number one, the criminals should not be allowed to use fruits of the crime. Number two, the bank should help in the investigation. And number three was that there should be international cooperation. Now, here the victims have been deprived from their fruits of crime. And therefore, international cooperation would be there, and our cases will be strengthened abroad.
Very good. I mean, it's heartening to hear that these accused will not be able to enjoy fruits of crime. But will this, in your view, sir, act as a deterrent for others who may want to commit financial crime in India and then run away overseas?
Certainly, it is a demonstrative effect that government of India will not leave anybody who has frauded the country people, who have frauded the public money. They would be brought to the book. They will not be allowed to use the proceeds of crime, and they will be extradited to our country. The country will make all the efforts for that.
Okay. So one last question before, we move to the next section. There is action against these accused. But what about those who are alleged to have colluded with them to commit this fraud against our country, sir? Those in India.
See, the cases have been filed against them. Criminal cases are there in the court. And those people who have colluded with the fraudsters, they are being tried there, and they will suffer for their actions.
Fair enough. For the moment, Mr. Karnal Singh, many thanks for joining me here on India